Just go share my screen. Hi, everybody. Just letting everyone in. Just wait maybe one more minute just to let everyone come on in. Hi, Mary Claire. Okay, so there's a few on. All right, well, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the FCA's, this is a special edition Lunch and Learn. Exciting one on Fair Work Enterprise Agreement changes. So today we are going to hear from Michael Wilkinson. Not sure if you've all heard from him before, but he's the Senior Employment Consultant for ER Strategies, and he was at our conference last year, so some of you may have met him and spoken to him there. ER Strategies, as you would know, are a platinum partner with the FCA, and they help franchises with employment relations, enterprise agreements and compliance. So we'll hear bits and pieces of all of that today. So without further ado, over to you, Michael.
Thanks for the introduction. All right, so look, as we're all aware, successive governments have, so the new government started making changes to enterprise agreements. There's been significant changes in the types of enterprise agreements, some of the procedural aspects and considerations, and building on from that, the Fair Work Commission has recently introduced further changes regarding model terms that go within new enterprise agreements. So in addition to all the other changes that have been brought on by government, the Fair Work Commission, its own initiative, has gone about redefining some terms and making sure that it's in line with expectation and what the government kind of sees that it needs to be. So in terms of these changes, the model terms have recently been changed. For all new enterprise agreements, these will take effect from 26th of February 2025. And this presentation will outline what's changed and what businesses need to do to address these changes, particularly when going and negotiating enterprise agreements. So in terms of the changes, a general summary. Perfect. Yeah, in terms of the summary, look, in terms of the model terms, the key changes will include revised flexibility terms for enterprise agreements, consultation terms for enterprise agreements, and terms dealing with disputes for enterprise agreements. Now, all of these changes have imposed additional responsibilities on businesses, as they usually do. Most changes only go one way, and there's a bit more procedural requirements and just a bit more details to address. But these will only apply for model terms in new enterprise agreements. In terms of the impact, there's no automatic application of these terms to existing EAs. And for enterprise agreements that have been voted on before the 26th of February, when the rules came into effect, the terms that you've negotiated will continue to apply. There's no change. So these rules will only apply when enterprise agreement is made on or after one, on or after it exists, or an existing one is varied after the date of that effect from the 26th of February. So this will really be important for those businesses who are going to negotiate, are potentially considering negotiations, as it's just a little procedural element, some procedural differences that should be addressed. In terms of the changes, the first one is the consultation requirements. In terms of enterprise agreements, there was a high degree of flexibility in relation to consultation. Consultation is what's required when there's going to be a change. there was generally a lack of clarity around what had to be consulted about and what didn't need to be consulted about. And unions and employees often use these terms in somewhat of a obstructive manner to create disputes, to create issues, and generally push back on businesses when they wanted to make changes. So after a lot of input by business groups, the Fair Work Commission has amended the model term, and it's codified that consultation is only required for major changes, those affecting productions, programs, structure, and technology. So all of these things here, by codifying that it's significant, by codifying that it's major, it's potentially stopped the ability for unions and employees to use these provisions and abuse them to affect change or prevent improvements in a business. So this is actually pretty good term for business groups, and there are really good things about this. So if you go and bargain now, knowing that it's only significant changes that matter, you can get really good consultation requirements that spare some of the red tape, spare some of the little fiddly bits of negotiations that happened previously, and it will improve business outcomes for all. In terms of workplace changes and consultation, there are some other aspects of the change, and the consultation requirements generally now require you to explain the reasons for the change. This doesn't mean you have to go into great deals of depth, detail, provide sensitive materials. It's more so to provide an explanation to employees and their representatives so they can discuss what is happening, what is transpiring, and they can make informed responses. Once upon a time, employers would either provide too much or too little detail. These consultation changes and the wording of the model term just means that you have to provide enough to actually have meaningful consultation. In terms of the consultation, once it's completed, you have to communicate the outcomes of the consultation. No longer, once upon a time, businesses would consult, communicate, and then there would be radio silence or vice versa. So this additional procedural step is just making sure people are updated as to what's being communicated, what's happened in the consultation, and where to from here. So in terms of this, it's not any real additional obligation. Most parties who engage in consultation try and keep notes, keep people updated, as it's generally the right thing to do. But this is just kind of codifying what reasonable expectations are, and it shouldn't really impact businesses. Another aspect of the changes, and it's redefined, as I said, it's kind of reconfirming what's expected. If an employee's job security and tenure if their job security and tenure are now factors in determining what is a major change. So if somebody has long job security, or it's going to result in a change to their job security, and they've got significant tenure, it's now a requirement to consult with them. While this was always a potential case, some employers didn't do it. So again, it's just kind of reaffirming to everybody, look, when you're consulting with people, it's going to impact their job security, you know, they've been there a while, you should consult with them to make sure they can potentially reduce the impacts of the changes and or be afforded that discussion to understand what and why things are happening. So these consultation changes might not be overly controversial. They kind of align with what already exists in modern awards for the most part anyway. Just a few little tweaks around the edges to provide a better experience for those impacted as well as businesses. Probably the most potentially impactful of the changes relates to dispute resolution and dispute resolution clauses. So even if unions are not party to an enterprise agreement, as a result of the changes, they can now be involved in disputes by default. This means traditionally you could avoid potential union involvement. This is no longer a possibility, and it's for new enterprise agreements. There are potential is more scope for potential union involvement. In terms of the other changes around this, the changes really codify that at first instance, disputes are attempted to be resolved at a workplace level. That's a predominant clause. It's similar to most clauses in most DAs which restrict it. However, under the new legislation, there is also power to refer it to the Fair Work Commission prior to an attempt to resolve the matter. So if it's not appropriate to resolve the matter at a workplace level, there's now a scope for the Fair Work Commission to intervene and resolve disputes. This is a significant change. Many of the enterprise agreements that have existed previously, many of the ones that you guys have in place, many of the ones that we've helped negotiate would often prohibit or stop disputes from eventuating because there were a number of layers that had to happen. So for larger franchise groups, that might be workplace level, then you had to speak to the district level, regional level, state level, escalations to HR and so forth before it could be escalated. Now there's potential for the union or an employee to skip that process and go to the Fair Work Commission. While the Fair Work Commission is supposed to not hear these matters, there is a very general catch-all that says they would need to be satisfied that it is appropriate for them to do so. And from the reading of the legislation, the intention, I think this will be somewhat broader than anticipated. It's not written in a restrictive manner. It doesn't really intend to be in a restrictive manner. And it gives a considerable amount of scope to the Commission to pick and choose when it intervenes. This could be potentially disruptive to businesses, which is significant to understand. In terms of the dispute resolution clauses as well, the key takeaway from this is if there are potential disputes, you kind of want to formalise them in a way. You want them to come to you quickly and get to the right people within the organisation so they can be resolved. If you're hearing potential issues around application of terms, payment of wages and the like, and disputes there, you want these complaints to be actioned and addressed in an appropriate manner to stop these complaints being escalated by unions, by other parties to the Fair Work Commission. Obviously, a disputes resolution process is costly. It usually would require representation of some kind or assistance. I know some of you guys could probably do it yourself. You're very experienced and the like, but it's always it's potentially beneficial to have a seasoned hand dealing with that. So that may result in additional costs. So I think what you should be looking at is finding ways to ensure that you're hearing what's going on in your business, identifying potential issues, and just making sure that that gets to the relevant people to resolve it before employees start looking elsewhere to get that advice, noting that some unions will be more likely to trigger those clauses than others. So have mindful regard to your industrial setting, whether there's union density and the like. But we'll come back to dealing with that at the end. It's just an opportunity for you guys to take stock of your organisations, be forward focused and start trying to avoid those potential disputes. In terms of other changes, probably the third and final change relates to flexibility agreements. Now, flexibility agreements, as you're all aware, are individual agreements that permit the variation of enterprise agreement terms. You can also have them for modern awards. So you can vary the terms of an award or an enterprise agreement in their application to the benefit of both parties by mutual agreement. It has to result in the employee being better off, which is a thing. And there's a number of procedural requirements around how these are rolled out. They can't be offered as a term of employment, etc. And there has to be some discussion. These agreements have the potential to take away or reduce penalty rates. It can change when employees work. It can change application of continuous work, potentially breaks, all kinds of things. So they're quite a useful tool in certain situations. So the changes around this are really important. Given the severity or the impact of what a flexibility agreement can do. Essentially, someone is, to the extent that they're able to vary a term of an industrial instrument, that has impacts. It has to be presented in a certain way. And as part of this, employees can now request meetings to discuss the arrangement. And an employer has to allow this to happen. Historically, these agreements were kind of rolled out in a way where employees were given an option, or they were initiated the request, but might not have had the consequences of that arrangement explained to them. So in that regard, employees somewhat missed the boat, didn't understand what the consequences were. And alternatively, sometimes employers pushed it too far and did things that weren't permitted to be included in an individual flexibility arrangement. So this kind of provision just provides check and balance to ensure that they're being used right and employees understand what is happening when they enter into these agreements. The other thing is that's much more pressing in terms of procedural requirement is the agreement must outline how these can be ended. So traditionally, there are structures in awards and enterprise agreements that say an IFA can be ended by either party by giving notice. And what is the consequence of doing so? So those notice periods vary depending on agreement or award, but there is normally a period where either party can terminate the arrangement. Historically, that wasn't really talked about, because if you enter into an arrangement, businesses want certainty. They want the arrangement to last indefinitely. So it often wasn't put how to end it. This is one now where agreement must outline how it can be ended. So what are the steps to end it? Who is told who it gets ended to? And how much notice do they have to give to end it? By putting people on notice, the effect is when people are aware of something, they might choose to do it. It wouldn't come as a surprise for me to say, and if an employee didn't know they could do something, they would never do it. But now you're telling them about it. There's a chance they'll read, ask questions through the processes above, and identify that is a case. And if the agreement no longer suits them, they may wish to change and get out of it. So that's just something for you to consider when you're offering agreements, considering how to use them. It's likely that there will be an increase of some kind as to termination. Might not be a big impact, might be a bit more pronounced, depends on the nature of the agreement, but this is something to watch out for, as we can expect by letting someone know that you can terminate an agreement, they are probably more likely to terminate that agreement. So that's another little thing about IFAs. They are quite restricted in use. Still a good tool for some situations, still really useful, but it's just about making sure those procedural steps are followed. In terms of the implications for businesses, look, or if your business is on an enterprise agreement that's expired, potentially going to be renegotiated soon, or if you're in the process of negotiation, I would recommend that you review the model terms established by the Fair Work Commission, and you should consider the impacts prior to enterprise agreement negotiations. We can help you do that. You can seek advice. It's really important to understand the full extent of these changes and how it's going to impact your business. Another consideration generally is these terms, particularly dispute resolution, have the potential to make your business more accessible to unions. Now, in terms of this, it's neither a good nor bad thing to have access to unions, but if it is your inclination not to want a third party on site, there are strategies you can put in prior to negotiations, prior to dealing with disputes that will help you moving forward. So if you think that at some point down the road you're going to be compelled to negotiate, you're going to have to renew your agreement, it's already past its expiry date and you're exposed, one basic strategy that a business can do is start engaging their staff, working on how to respond to processes, deal with workplace requests, and start putting in the infrastructure now that these terms are not as significant for you moving forward. If you have robust processes, robust policies to deal with disputes, to deal with complaints, to deal with any kind of general disruption. That will take, and you deal with them effectively, that's going to stop these clauses being invoked. It's going to stop unions ever getting access. Employees generally go to unions when they are dissatisfied or there is an issue. If you can nip that dissatisfaction in the bud, talk to them, explain it to them, or direct the inquiries to the business internally to resolve, that is going to provide a degree of insulation from a third party. By having these processes in place as well, it then negates and stops when complaints are made and disputes are on foot and unions are on board and they come in to have a look. One of the questions I will ask is about the enterprise agreement and what terms and conditions govern the employment relationship. If they identify that the instrument's expired or the instrument's potentially up for renegotiation, they're on notice about that, and they can then potentially start negotiation processes, compel you guys to bargain if that's their ambit, and really move this process along. Disputes can be used to gain membership. There's all kinds of things like that. So by avoiding disputes and taking those proactive steps, one, you're engaging your staff, you're addressing issues before they get out of control, but you're providing insulation from potentially going and being compelled to negotiate or dealing with the union in circumstances where you might otherwise not have had to. So it's always good to be positive and proactive in that regard. In terms of the changes as well, if you're relying on IFAs and you are looking, and it is at that point where renewal is going to be occurring, it's really important that you look at, is the IFA used on an individual basis, or does it form more of a systemic pattern? Are you negotiating things that are beneficial to the business or beneficial for the individual involved? And if it's beneficial to the business and you know it's something that should be done, you can consider using those terms of the individual flexibility agreement and trying to negotiate them into whatever agreement is reached. If something is best for the business, it should be in the EA. And that's something really for businesses to consider. If you can get something in that's the terms and conditions, one, you eradicate the need for IFAs, the paperwork, the process, the need to give it out at a certain time, the need to have it signed, the potential risk that an employee changes their mind and cancels it, the need to ensure that you're not coercing and all these other things that exist around the procedures around IFAs. If you can get it into the substantive document, make it one of the rules that govern your business, you're saving yourself a lot of admin and reducing the risks around IFAs generally. So these are the types of things I would encourage you all to start considering, particularly if you're looking to renegotiate. If you're not looking to renegotiate, and it's unlikely that this is the case, it'll be a bit less pressing, but in this regard, it's better be on the front foot and put yourself in a position of strength. And I encourage all franchise businesses to do that. We all know the scrutiny that's on the sector. We all know if a franchisee or a franchisor is found to do one thing wrong, there's a significant amount of pressure from Fair Work or unions around this. So be mindful of the situation, take positive steps, and if you are going into negotiations, having this in order first usually makes it go smoother, particularly if unions are involved. Yeah. So in terms of next steps and so forth, these changes are in effect now. They are in effect, and there is support available to you guys. FCA members can call and get free initial advice from ER Strategies. We're happy to talk to you about these things and all things employment relations. These changes are significant, and they're kind of potentially the straw that may break the camel's back in light of a lot of the other things that have happened previously. Over time, EAs have become more complicated. There's less flexibility and the like. There's more risk around it. There's more ability for unions to become involved. This just further strengthens that kind of trajectory. So if you do need help, you do have questions about your enterprise agreement, feel free to reach out. I'll leave these support codes available now, and I'll turn to the audience and see whether there's any questions anyone wants to ask, and we can go from there.
Sure. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to type in chat or just take yourself off mute and ask the question. I've just been given a question here, text. It's a general question with respect to enterprise bargaining. Michael, is it still worth doing with these changes?
Yeah, look, enterprise agreements, there is still a place for enterprise agreements for businesses, and particularly franchises in the franchise space. Enterprise agreements, while it has become progressively less flexible and the like, there's still scope to potentially eradicate compliance issues and get things in that really help drive flexibility in your business. Modern awards are meant for industries. They're meant to cover everyone in a specific industry. Whereas an enterprise agreement, you can drive changes that help your business. You can do this around areas that you might like to look at that are probably in the spotlight in the franchise space, around breaks and rest pauses. You can potentially go and negotiate more favourable terms and conditions around that. You can potentially remove needs for unpaid breaks where it's not feasible to have, and potentially replace them with paid crib breaks or other things where employees maintain service and just get paid for that time. Additionally, you can change hours of work, you can change allowances, you can potentially add things in that you need to suit your businesses. So you can potentially vary penalty rates, you can potentially vary overtime application. Obviously, there's always an employee has to pass a better off overall test, but in the scheme of things, there's a real opportunity to drive changes that help your business. We see a lot of our clients, particularly the franchisors, they have restrictive awards that require really tight parameters around part-time work is one area that stands out. You have to specify hours, keep a set routine, all of these things under the award. And through negotiation and minimal cost, they've actually made it that they don't have spared all the procedural requirements around that. And essentially, as long as they give a minimum number of hours on a certain days, they can work them whatever days they want, whatever times they want, and they work over that. Overtime's not payable until 38 hours. So there is a lot of benefit if you set it up right. Obviously, those benefits of what I've discussed will depend on your individual business. For example, if you're not using part-time work, the benefits I've discussed aren't there. But there are probably benefits no matter what award, what industry you're in, to go and get an EA and look at it. Obviously, you're going to weigh up the costs and the potential other things that can arise. Like obviously, when you negotiate a union, negotiate an EA, you're potentially bringing in unions, you're potentially bringing in third parties to negotiate, and that can be difficult. It can be disruptive. But at the same time, if you have good relationships with your employees, if you have a really positive business, if people believe in your brand and what you do, you can really just affect those changes with minimal effect and get something that works for you. With Fair Work, with law generally, not everything works for businesses. I accept that. I appreciate that you guys might feel hamstrung. You might feel like your hands are tied, but there is live opportunities in enterprise bargaining to build what you want, to get the instrument to reflect your needs, as opposed to that of the industry as a whole. Every business is unique. We see businesses we see industry divergence where new entrants are coming in, doing things differently, disrupting, building better businesses, building enterprise agreements and building terms and conditions that reflect that is probably a really good opportunity. So if you ever want to consider this, it's always good to get advice. Some things you can change, some things you might not be able to, some things that might be cost prohibitive. But if you don't ask, you don't know. So I'd always seek advice and work out whether or not this is a strategy for you to go down. But enterprise agreements still have a place. A lot of big companies still use them. They get a lot of flexibility. And if you look at Australia's largest employers that use them, most of them get this extreme flexibility at a minimal cost. So it's just about looking at whether the business case supports that, but definitely, Helen, there's still a place.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? It's all quite detailed. If you don't want to ask questions today, you can obviously just lift up your camera and grab that QR code, the member QR code. And that way you can go straight through to the help desk. Is everyone overwhelmed by that information?
Does anyone have any other questions that they'd like to talk about employment relations other than enterprise agreements? I know this is a hot space for all you guys in franchising. So if there's any other questions you'd like to ask, I can help you while we're here.
Well, there you go. Some free questions. Come on. There's a few in-house legal counsel here. There's a few HR people. No.
All quiet.
Everyone's quiet. That's all right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate all the information that you gave us. Very interesting and you know, topical right now. So what I'd like to do is, we'll take this full recording, send it to you all, and you know, everyone that registered, so that you've got all the information there. And when I send the recording, I'll resend that QR code so that you can go straight through to the help desk, which is part of your member benefit. So next Lunch and Learn is coming up on the 19th of March. So just do a little place card in your diaries. In the next day or so, the actual invite will drop into your calendar. So once again, thanks, Michael, and thank you to ER Strategies, and thanks to everyone that jumped on today.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.